Greetings everybody and welcome to a new mini-series of videos where I'm basically going to take a game that I've already reviewed and simply give my reasons for changing the original score that I gave it. So in this case, we're going to be looking at The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time for the Nintendo 64. I reviewed this game all the way back in 2012 and I ended up giving it a solid 10 out of 10, stating that this was my all-time favorite Zelda game. If it's not A Link to the Past that many fans consider to be the best, it was Ocarina of Time. This was unfortunately a year before I played and finished Majora's Mask for the first time and got back into the Wind Waker after several years, where I realized that Ocarina of Time has a lot more problems than I already mentioned in the review. Before we get into that though, let's take a quick look at the 2011 remake for the 3DS. Now even though I managed to get myself a 3DS and played Ocarina 3D, I still don't know a way of recording footage for it. So I'd like to thank Pack Attack 04082 for letting me borrow his footage for the review. If you want to see a full walkthrough of Ocarina of Time 3D or any other game of your choosing without loud and obnoxious commentary, go check this guy out. Ocarina of Time 3D is exactly how you would imagine it. The graphics have obviously gotten a huge facelift with an increased frame rate of 30 frames per second. The Ocarina itself is also given its own button on the touchscreen and the notes are coded into different buttons on the 3DS, rather than having to use the C stick on the GameCube and Wii versions. Not only that, you can assign an extra item on the touchscreen, giving you a total of 4 items to use at your leisure, instead of the usual 3. I only find myself putting in items that I won't use that often though, like Deku sticks or bottles. Taking note from Skyward Sword, you can find Sheikah stones outside Link's house and the Temple of Time to give you a good idea of what to do next. So never again will you be stuck on figuring out that you need to feed Jabu Jabu a small fish to get into his belly. There's also a boss rush mode you can access by sleeping in your bed, and brought over from the GameCube version is the Master Quest, which now completely flips the entire game as well as having redesigned dungeons. But there are 2 main reasons as to why I think that this is the definitive version to play Ocarina of Time if you haven't done so already. The first being that the text is much faster. I am not joking, you cannot believe how much of an improvement that is. I think you spend a majority of your time on the N64 version just scrolling through slow moving text, which for the most part brings the pacing to an utter halt. I am so glad that this was fixed in the 3DS version. The other reason is that the Iron and Hover Boots are now equipable items that activate instantly and makes dungeons like the Water and Shadow Temple a hell of a lot more comfortable. The Water Temple's still a ridiculously boring dungeon, but the change to the Iron Boots and the pictures showing the water levels you can activate make it much more bearable. I've gotta say though, I was totally wrong about the Dark Link fight being the best mini-boss in the game. I try as hard as I can to have a fair sword fight, but Dark Link is like a spoiled child who copies everything you do and refuses to lose. It all just comes down to luck as to whether you land a hit or not, which is a huge shame because using the hammer or Din's fire to defeat Dark Link feels incredibly anticlimactic. There are a few more little changes in this 3DS version, but I'll let you figure that out for yourself. Now let's brush aside the god-awful Water Temple and Navi for a minute and take a gander at the little things that I and maybe you have never realized until after playing the later games. Probably one of the biggest problems that I have with Ocarina of Time is the story and characters. The story not so much because it's your average Zelda narrative of Ganondorf trying to obtain the Triforce and gain ultimate power, and to be fair, this was the first attempt at creating a fully 3D Zelda game, so it does have a relatively good excuse of creating a basic story. Most of the characters, however, do not make any attempt to be interesting and likable, and instead just come out as being incredibly shallow. Every single one of the side quests involve collecting something and bringing it back to them, because for some unexplained reason, these people can't get off their lazy asses and do it themselves. Now for someone like the owner of the Skulltula house, this makes sense, because he's cursed and is incapable of racking up the gold Skulltula token count. But what about this farmer in Kakariko Village who says that she's lost her cuckoos and asks Link to find them all and put them in the pen? You could argue it's because she says she's allergic to them, so then why is she taking care of cuckoos in the first place? And for that matter, why doesn't she just put on gloves or a hazmat suit or something? Not only that, but once you do give all of her cuckoos back, get the empty bottle and go in and out of a door, guess what? They're all scattered again. You can't seriously be this ignorant. All that work I just did and you lose them again almost immediately? And what about this woman in the market who's lost her dog and doesn't bother to search for him herself? She just stays at home and waits for someone to do it for her, not even putting up any signs or posters explaining what the dog looks like. You just have to take a lucky guess and feel completely unappreciated if you show her the wrong one. It's stuff like this that makes me wonder if saving Hyrule is really worth it. Aside from the sages that you rescue, are these people really going to look up to me if I stop Ganondorf and things go back to normal? Come to think of it, at the end of the game, Zelda plays a song that returns Link 7 years back and becomes a kid again. And after that, he goes to see Zelda and supposedly inform her about Ganondorf's plans and arrest him before he can do any more harm. If that's the case, what was the point of conquering the temples as adult Link and fighting Ganon at the end? Link already knows that Ganondorf is going to try and take over the world in 7 years' time, so why didn't he just go see Zelda as soon as he saw what was to become of it? Oh, that's right, because Link has barely any emotions in this game. I don't think you can count the amount of times Link just stares blankly in conversations. It's almost as if he's in his own little world while someone like Sheik is explaining what he needs to do. Oh, and did I forget to mention that this guy is slow as hell? I know that he's carrying a huge ton of kit, but come on, this is a video game. For a world this big, he shouldn't have to travel so slowly. Yeah, Epona and the transportation songs help alleviate the amount of time it takes, but the absence of the Pegasus boots from A Link to the Past is still questionable. Speaking of A Link to the Past, this does not mean that I prefer this game to Ocarina of Time. Neither of them are my number one choice for best Zelda game. But despite all the complaining I've been doing about Ocarina of Time, I would by no means classify this as a bad game. If it wasn't for Ocarina of Time, there wouldn't be a Majora's Mask or a Wind Waker or a Twilight Princess, some of my favorite Zelda games. All of them take elements from Ocarina of Time and expand upon them to an insane degree. It's amazing as it is that Ocarina of Time managed to smoothly jump into the third dimension on the series' first try, and that's not easy to do. There were countless amount of 2D franchises that got worse when it transitioned into 3D, but the Zelda series is one of the rare few that broke through. You can still have a good time playing Ocarina, which I'm very glad to say, and the puzzles are so easy that it's perfectly user-friendly for newcomers to the series. This was the game that got me into Zelda in the first place, and I thank Nintendo so much for making it. But for my final score, I'm changing it from a 10 out of 10 to an 8 out of 10, standing for it's still better than the original NES game. Hopefully I haven't pissed you off too much and can understand why I decided to change the score. With that said, I will see you all next time.